Hello and welcome to Torah Thoughts. The portion of the Torah that we read this week's Parsha, is Parshat Bo. And it describes the final events surrounding God's removal of the Jewish people from Egypt and from slavery. And it contains the last 3 plagues of the 10 plagues that God brought against Egypt. So up until now, the first 7 plagues, the first 6 of the first 7 plagues, Paro found some sort of a way to rationalize, to excuse the plagues that God had brought against Egypt as some sort of national phenomena. It wasn't God, it was some sort of a natural thing that happened. But the 7th plague he wasn't able to do. To do that because the 7th plague was hail, and the hail was made out of a mixture of fire and ice, which he couldn't explain away. So now he changes his tune, and God says to Moshe, he says to him, Bo el Paro, come to Paro, Ki ani ichbadati et libo, because I hardened his heart, v'et lev avadav, and the heart of his servants, leman shiti ototai ele b'kirbo, so that I can continue to display these signs, my signs among them. And then the next verse is very, very important and very telling. Uleman tesaper be'oznei vincha uven bincha, and so that you can relate in the ears of your children and your children's children, et asher hitalalti b'mitzrayim, that I made a mockery of Egypt. This is very important. We're going to come back to that. Ve'et ototai asher samti bam, and my signs that I placed among them, v'yedatem ki ani Hashem, and you will know that I am God. So what we have here is God is saying, I'm putting all these punishments on Egypt, and we've read this before, but why am I doing this? So that I can show everyone that Egypt is nothing. This superpower, Egypt, Paro himself told people he was a god, and they worshipped multiple fake gods. They are nothing. And God, the God of Israel, the God of the universe, he controls everything, and no one else does. So anyway, so we see here the process. I want to talk a little bit about the process that God put the Egyptians through as all this was taking place, and why he did it in such a way. So it wasn't just that the Egyptians were being punished; they were dominated. They were made to appear helpless. They were helpless, in fact, and they were broken down. They were demoralized, humiliated, and that's what the Torah says. B'yad chazaka v'zroa netuyah. God took them out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, meaning it was a display. It was an illustration of God's ultimate power, God's unstoppable, His omnipotence, and we see that after the hail, after like I said, the 7th plague of hail, Paro actually says to Moshe, I'm sorry, you were right. God is righteous, and I am evil. But then he changes his tune, and he decides to negotiate. So going back again, the first few plagues, God comes sends Moshe to Egypt, and Moshe comes to Paro, and he says, let my people go. So God says, let my people go, and he says God's name, Hashem, and Paro says, I know many gods. I don't know this God. And Paro was being honest. I don't know this God. I don't recognize him, and I'm not letting the Jews go. And Moshe says, okay, you'll know the God because he's the only true God. And then Moshe brings these, the first 2 plagues on Egypt, blood, frogs, and Paro actually has his magicians copy. They repeat, the same thing that Moshe did. And he says, it's just magicians. And then it gets a little bit more humiliating. The 3rd plague, lice, they couldn't imitate. Okay, but still Paro's heart is hardened. He said it was a natural phenomenon. And then comes the 7th plague, where Paro has no excuse whatsoever. He's actually crumbling, and he says, God is righteous, I am evil. This is not a natural phenomenon. But still, he negotiates. He tries anyway to negotiate. And he says, okay, look, you want to worship your God? By all means, go. But who does the worshiping? The adult men. Okay, let the men go. The women can stay. The children can stay. The old people can stay. And Moshe now is presented with a unique historical opportunity. That's what people in modern terms would call it. Here is Paro, who says, let's negotiate, let's compromise for peace. And Moshe says, no. And there's a lesson here. Moshe says, no compromise. Everybody's going to go. The old people, the young people, the babies, the men, the women, everybody. And Paro says, no. And Moshe misses an opportunity to make peace. Isn't that horrible? Well, then comes the next 2 plagues, right? Locusts, which eat up all of Egypt's crops, and then comes the darkness, where pretty much all of Egypt was dark, black, everything. And Paro talks to Moshe again. He says, okay, you know what, fine. I'll compromise. Everybody goes, but leave the livestock behind. And Moshe again says, no. The livestock are going to come with us, and in fact, you're going to give us livestock also. You're going to give us cattle because we need to bring sacrifices to God. And Paro is infuriated by that. But there's a lesson here, okay? The common belief is that after a long battle, when the evil oppressor is finally on his knees and he says, okay, I'm ready to compromise, the common consensus is, okay, now is an opportunity, let's compromise. No. When the oppressor is brought to his knees, that's not an opportunity to compromise. That's an opportunity to crush him. And Moshe says, no, God controls the universe. So just because he's on his knees, now I got to worry. I mean, the purpose of compromise is because, hey, take what you can. You may not get better. No. When God is in control, you don't compromise. So what happens? So again, first we have the plagues. Paro thinks he can repeat them. He can't repeat them, but he thinks it's a natural phenomenon. Now he's humiliated. It's not a natural phenomenon. It's God, but he tries to negotiate. The negotiations don't work. And now Moshe takes it a step further. And he says, not only I've been coming to you all this time asking you to release the Jews. That's not going to happen anymore. You're going to come looking for me. And you're going to beg me to leave Egypt. And that's exactly what happened. But before that's the last plague, the death of the firstborn. But before that happens, God gives Moshe he gives him several instructions, but I'm going to discuss three of them. Three of the instructions that God gives Moshe to pass on to the Jews while they were still in Egypt. And this is leading up to the final plague of the death of the final punishment of the death of the firstborn. So first of all, God says to Moshe to tell the Jews that each family should take a lamb or a goat and tie it to their bed. That's weird, right? Tie a sheep to your bed. And then that's on the 10th day of the month of Nisan. On the 14th day of the month of Nisan, you slaughter it. And then you eat it. You roast it, and that night, which is already the 15th of Nisan, you eat it, and then the next morning the Jews left Egypt. Right? Which is, okay, God says to bring a sacrifice, to slaughter the sheep. That I get. But tie it to your bed. And the reason for that is because the Egyptians, this is very important, the Egyptians worshipped animals. They worshipped lambs. They worshipped goats. And the point of this was so that the Egyptians should come and ask the Jews, what's this all about? And the Jews should answer, oh yeah, I'm going to slaughter this sheep in 4 days. And I'm going to eat it. I like roasted lamb, and I'm going to have my roasted lamb. And the fact that you're stupid enough to worship a lamb as your God doesn't mean that I have to worry about you being humiliated. And in fact, first of all, so it showed God's power over the Egyptians. The Jews were not afraid of the Egyptians. It also showed that the Egyptians were helpless to do anything about it. And finally, it also demonstrated that the Egyptians' God is pathetic. It's fake. That they're worshiping a sheep. And here I am, you're a slave, right? The Jews were slaves. And I'm going to kill the sheep and eat them for dinner. And that was important because, again, God is illustrating here that he's the one and only true God. Okay, now you may say there are other gods that we didn't disprove, but the point here is that Egypt being the superpower of the world, right? Other nations believe, okay, they know which God to worship. Obviously, their God makes them a superpower. No, their God is nothing. Their God isn't a God. Anyway, so that's the second thing is, the Jews were instructed to go to their Egyptian neighbors, knock on the door, and ask them to lend them expensive valuables, jewelry, gold or silver plates or trays, or you're not. Oh, listen, I noticed you have this beautiful vase, this beautiful gold vase sitting on your table. Can I borrow it? And the Jews borrowed from the Egyptians so much gold and silver that they went out from Egypt with tremendous riches because they never gave it back. And that's odd. You want to take all this, again, God is displaying his power and his might, and you're going to leave Egypt with all of these riches. So take the loot that you're entitled to as punishment, as payment for all these years of slavery. But why do you have to kind of sneak your way about it and borrow it and then not give it back? That doesn't fit, right? Well, the reason for it is twofold. First of all, so that the Egyptians should realize, and the world should realize when we read the story, that the Egyptians, after everything that was going on, how helpless they were, after they already see us tying their sheep god to a bed, that they're helpless. And when we come and ask them to lend us stuff, they lent it to us. Now the Egyptians were the ones who were subservient to the Jews. The second reason is to teach the Jews a lesson. Just because your oppressor who's been oppressing you for hundreds of years, now that he's weak, he's being nice to you, doesn't mean that you should be thankful to him. You don't give gratitude to someone who's evil, but for the moment he's nice to you only because he has no choice. You're going to take what he lends you, and don't say, oh, the Egyptian was nice to me. No. You're going to leave Egypt with all of that, and on the 15th, we're going to kill the firstborn in his family. And the third thing is what to do once they brought that sacrifice. So they slaughter the lamb, right? And they take the blood from that lamb, and it's the famous thing. They painted the doorposts of their house with blood. And God explains why. That's where the word Passover comes from. When I strike Egypt and kill all of the firstborn, I will pass over the houses that have the blood on the doorposts. So what's the story behind that? Okay. First of all, God didn't just kill the Egyptian firstborn. God killed the firstborn male of everything, not every person, everything in Egypt. So if there was a family of mosquitoes that had a firstborn son, yeah, that mosquito died. And it may sound a bit weird, but that's exactly what happened. If there was a family of pigeons on the street, and the firstborn child in that family was male, that pigeon died. And also the non-Egyptian people in Egypt, all of their firstborn males died as well. You might ask why. Well, again, two reasons. Number one, the Torah tells us, so everyone in the world should see. It wasn't a natural phenomenon, but it wasn't your God or your God or your God who did it. It was the God of Israel. The only ones who were spared were the Jews. And the next reason, why did they deserve it though? It was because, and this is very important also, we're going to come back to it. It's because the non-Egyptians in Egypt, they participated. They helped the Egyptians to enslave the Jews, first of all, to win favor with the Egyptians, and also because they benefited from our slavery. And they benefited it, and they enjoyed it, and they were complicit, and for that, they get treated no different than the Egyptians. And again, we're going to come back to that. But I want to ask a question here. Why was it so important for God to do all of these miracles? It says to show God's greatness. Couldn't God show his greatness in a much, much better way, in an easier way, by having Paro miraculously change his mind? Imagine if Paro woke up one morning and said, you know what, I'm convinced the God of Israel is the one true God, and I'm releasing his people because he's in control. Wouldn't that be such an amazing miracle? Why didn't God do that? And the answer is in the text that we read in the Haggadah on Passover. It says, "Avadim hayinu leParo b'Mitzrayim." We were slaves to Paro in Egypt. "V'yotzeinu Hashem Elokeinu misham b'yad chazaka." And Hashem took us out there with a mighty hand, with Zerah Netiyan, an outstretched arm. Again, meaning an illustration of God's might. V'ilu lo hotzei HaKadosh Baruch Hu misham. But had God not taken us out of there, harei anu uvneinu uvnei baneinu hayinu mishubadim leParo b'Mitzrayim. Had God not taken us out of Egypt, we and our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would still be enslaved to Paro in Egypt. Now, of course, this begs the question, what do you mean? In today's generation, I still read this. I read this every year on Pesach. Do I really believe that had God not taken us out of Egypt 3,300 years ago, I would be a slave to Paro in Egypt right now? That Egyptian kingdom doesn't exist anymore. Paro doesn't exist anymore. Obviously, we wouldn't still be slaves. History changes. The answer is no. Had God not taken us out in the manner that he did, but rather had God made the miracle where Paro miraculously let us out, today we would be paying tribute to Paro. We would be in servitude to Paro. We would be indebted to him. Oh, the benevolent Paro who released us. On Pesach, we'd be reading the Haggadah to Paro. And that's the reason God made all of these miracles, all of these punishments, to show that Paro did everything possible. He did everything possible to try to prevent it, but no, you cannot go against the will of God because he's the master and he controls everything. Now, the second thing is going back to the borrowing. Okay, we see again, like I said, it teaches us not to be thankful to the oppressor if he's momentarily nice to you. Well, again, that's one of the reasons. Had Paro released us, we would have fell for it. We would have been, okay, listen, he's the oppressor, but he stopped oppressing us. So that's, again, going back to the reason why we had to borrow that. So the lesson here is, when the oppressor stops oppressing you because he had no choice. It's one thing if he did tshuva, if he repented. Okay, that's a whole different issue. Did he really repent? And how do you take into account the pluses and the minuses? But the fact that the oppressor had no choice but to stop oppressing us, he doesn't deserve credit for that. Now, there are two events that took place this week that I want to tie into this week's to this week's parsha. One of them is International Holocaust Memorial Day, right? Now, International Holocaust Memorial Day was something that was established by the United Nations a few years ago to acknowledge and to observe, what took place during the Holocaust. I find it offensive, and I don't observe that. The Jews have a day that we established to observe and to honor the people in the Holocaust who perished and who fought against the Holocaust, and that's Yom HaGvura. That's the 27th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan. Now, what's the difference one or the other? Well, first of all, let's take the date in which these days are observed. Yom HaShoah is observed on the 27th day of Nisan, which coincides with the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Remember, there's no victory in the Holocaust. The Holocaust didn't end with victory. It simply ended because the nation that was exterminating us lost a war. Okay? And the Allies didn't fight on our behalf. Let's be clear about that. So the day that we honor the heroes of the Holocaust and the day that we honor the people who perished is on the day that coincides with the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the 27th day of Nisan. The United Nations International Holocaust Memorial Day is on January 27th because that coincides with the day that the Allies supposedly liberated the concentration camps. Well, let's be clear, they didn't liberate anything. Okay? The Allies won a war against the Germans, and they weren't trying to save the Jews, they were trying to prevent Germany from conquering them. Okay? And the Allies, in fact, going back to the death of the firstborn, the Allies were complicit in the Holocaust. And we should not let them control the narrative of the Holocaust. It's not on January 27th. It's not about them saving us. All right? We're not going to look at them like they were benevolent to us, because every nation in the world, with the exception of the Dominican Republic and Denmark, every nation, with the exception of those two countries, they did nothing to save us. They helped. The Swiss helped the Nazis kill Jews. The Swiss stole everything every time when the Jews deposited money, thinking, well, listen, if I get it, they didn't know how bad this thing would get. They put money in Swiss banks. The Swiss stole all of that. The Swiss actually took Jews that made it across into Switzerland and gave them back to the Nazis. All right. The British killed several chances to save Jews. There was an opportunity to save 1 million Jews in Hungary, and the British went to great lengths to prevent that deal from happening. And the British could have by simply saying a word, they could have saved 730 Jews on the ship, the Struma, but they didn't. And you know who else is complicit with the Struma? The Turks. When the Struma escaped Romania with 730 Jews on it, and it made it to the coast of Turkey, but its engines broke down, the Turks wouldn't let a single Jew off that plane, not to go into Turkey, but to repair the ship. They wouldn't let them do that because they were afraid, they may end up staying. And the British could have helped by simply saying, yeah, we'll let them into the land of Israel. But they said, no, we won't let them into the land of Israel. And the Turks said, in that case, we're not letting you into our country to fix your ship. They towed that ship out to sea. The ship hit a mine, blew up, and everyone on it died. Then there was FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Yimach Shemo V'Zichro, who he had an opportunity to save 900 Jews who actually escaped Germany and made it all the way to America. But he wouldn't let a single Jew off that ship, the St. Louis, and sent that ship back to Europe, and 2/3 of the people on that ship wound up in Hitler's jaws. The list goes on and on and on about the conference of the Evian conference, where every country at that conference, all the countries gathered to find a solution to the Jewish problem, and they all agreed we need to find a place for Jews to escape, but not my country. Like I said, every country except for the Dominican Republic said that. And now they want to come and control the narrative, and they're already doing it. What do they do when they control the narrative? It wasn't the Holocaust against Jews, it was against people. And it wasn't they don't talk about the Germans doing it. Someone killed a bunch of people. And they come to Yad Vashem like they came this week, and they talk about, I forgot which, I think it was a German diplomat who discussed how the oppression of the Palestinians is no different than what the Nazis did to the Jews. I need them to have an International Holocaust Memorial Day? No, I don't think so. We have our own Yom HaShoah. No, thank you. All right? And then you have the French president, John Macaroni, who's visiting a church in Jerusalem. And the Israeli Secret Service, the Israelis are offering him protection. They're giving him security, and he kicks those security men out from this church that he's visiting. No, thank you. And the second thing that I want to bring us to is what happens when you let people who oppress you, you treat them like they're your benefactors. They control you. And alachas kama v'kama, 1,000,000 times more so if it's someone who's your friend. Donald J. Trump, he's a friend of us, no question about it. He's been a friend. But now he unveils this peace deal. He calls it the deal of the century, okay? Which basically talks about giving half of our land away to our enemies. And Bibi Netanyahu he wraps himself up in this deal like it was a talit. Why? Because he feels that he's indebted to Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump, and he said it in his own speech, Trump, I was so nice to you. I recognized Jerusalem. I recognized the Golan Heights, and I always said, this is me rather, not Trump. I always said when Trump recognized, you don't say thank you. You say, you did the right thing, Mr. President. Congratulations. As far as thank you goes, we don't need anybody to recognize. God recognizes. And it's nice, and yes, we do acknowledge we acknowledge friends, but always remember, we are not beholden to anyone because of it, and because you said something nice to us, that doesn't mean we're going to go commit suicide on your behalf. And what do we read when we read Hallel on Pesach? We say, Tov l'chasod b'Hashem miftoach bin divim. Better to take refuge in Hashem than to trust in princes. Don't trust in humans, trust in God. And that's the lesson we learn from this week's Parsha. When God said, I will take you out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, that is that we rely on no one, friend or foe. It's good if you're a friend. But that doesn't mean that we rely on you. It means we congratulate you, and because of that, God will bless you. Always remember this, as an American, as a proud American, I want America to be good to Israel for America's sake. And that's what the Torah tells us. God will bless those that bless us and curse those that curse us. But never, ever, ever feel beholden to someone because he's giving you what God actually gives you. That goes for your friends, and that goes especially for a wicked enemy who's been your oppressor for so many years. That's my Torah thought. What's yours? Thank you for watching. Shabbat Shalom.